The Alberta government may have provided a fund of $130 million to the federal government after not spending money clean the old oil and gas wells. In 2020, cash is part of a $7 billion program aimed at addressing environmental risk of federal government's aging oil gas infrastructure, and at same time providing work to surrounded energy services sector after pandemic starts oil prices. Fédéral money BC, Alberta and Saskatchewan. Initially, Alberta's program had problems because the state personnel were drowning by a series of floods of application. Alberta wants to stay in the province, however. A part of the money is still not spent because the approved cleaning works have not been completed. CBC News is expected to return to about $130 million, which Alberta's state government approved as a fair estimate. In 2020, during removal of an old natural gas well in Alberta, the air view as a well pipe is withdrawn from ground. According to the government's website, Alberta approved 37,589 applications, almost 3 years after the announcement of financing, but 3,445 were not completed. Latest invoices from oilfield service companies are still received. The other ministers and I wrote to the federal government here to keep the remaining funds in Alberta. We are still waiting for a response, Energy Minister Pete Guthrie said in an email. According to the Alberta Energy Regulator, there are tens of thousands of inactive oil and gas wells that pose an environmental risk due to potential soil and water contamination. In addition, they release methane gases. The lobby of First Nations for the left of funds last week, Indian Resource Council officials representing more than 100 First countries with oil and gas reserves, together with the state's environment and energy ministers, came together to make lobbying $430 million for ongoing improvement of wells. ERC President Stephen Buffalo, federal financing requires provinces to follow a certain time schedule and indicating that any money should be returned, indicating that this is a challenge, he said. Stephen Buffalo, president of Indian Resource Council, came together with the group's environment and energy ministers and said that wells came together to make lobbying $430 million to be spent on continuous improvement of First Nation. As a part of Alberta's program, the government has allocated more than $100 million for cleaning projects for the First Nations. This was very useful and very positive. So, we're doing our best to continue this program, B. Buffalo said. Nothing about 350 community members have not received skill training. The removal of aging wells and pipelines, the First Nations to use for housing and other purposes can release the land, he said. The community is growing even more, but its population. In 2019, more than a dozen oil field employees working in the midst of a farmer's area to remove an old natural gas. The federal government says that more than 7,135 full-time jobs have been supported in Alberta and Saskatchewan to date, and more than 49,000 wells have been dealt with. The Ministry Finance, in contact with all participants while watching good closing programs of Ministry Finance, federal government spokesman about whether Alberta will now allow funds to hold funds. Saskatchewan's accelerated site closure program was completed last week and spokesman Natasha Lipinski said, "We are sure that the entire $400 million program fund in the state is spent to support Saskatchewan businesses and workers." Lipinski said that approximately 8,800 wells have been recovered in addition to some pipelines and other infrastructure. The spokesperson for BC, state will publish final numbers for the well cleaning program in coming weeks.